Welcome back into another edition of the Vandy Sports Podcast alongside Joey Dwyer and a new guest, a new member of the VandySports.com team. We will get him introduced here in just a second, but we're talking some football today. Not a ton, obviously, to get to, but real quick, want to shout out our sponsors: Sutherland and Belk Injury Law, Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, The Wash House, and Maynard Nexon Government Contracts Group. Will, we introduced you on the board. You've been active on the board, but we're happy to have you on board now. And, this is just the beginning of a lot of football coverage that I think people are going to be excited about. And I know Joey's got another special announcement coming soon, and a lot of summer podcasts will be done. But, Will, let the people know who you are and kind of some of your background, especially with Vanderbilt.
Yeah, so I've known Billy for probably a couple years now, and we've talked obviously a lot about Vanderbilt. I live in East Tennessee, so obviously I'm living in like the enemy's territory, but I've always been a Vanderbilt fan. So I reached out to him, talked to Chris, met Joey, said, "Hey, how can I help you guys out? I want to get out more content. I want to talk more about Vanderbilt because our fan base deserves to have a place to go vent, listen to some good takes, listen to some bad takes, and just be able to hear someone talk about their team." So I just really wanted to do that because I love this school. I want to give them some place to listen to good sports talk, and I'm just wanting to help grow this fan base any way I can, just because of how much I love this team, even if they're absolutely terrible, which they have been for a while. So that's why I want to do it, and I'm excited to join you guys, and I can't wait to get started.
Well, we're looking forward to it. Obviously, we've we've been able to iron out some plans and details not only for this summer, but obviously in the fall, and kind of as we go, we'll continue to surprise some of the viewers and listeners with some of our plans for football season. We still got to iron out some of them, but looking forward to having Will on board. We've got, of course, a basketball announcement coming up, and we've got Joey still on board here. So Joey's not going anywhere. Joey, football season is I want to say near, but summer practices are going on right now. We're going to get to three things to watch offensively today, and obviously we got plenty of time to go through offensively, defensively, but we're going to get to three things to watch on offense today, and then we're going to get to some Carson Lawrence news, the Chattanooga Macaulay product. He's actually got one more year at Macaulay, some encouraging news there. So we do have some stuff to get into, but Joey, you want to kick us off with three things to watch on offense, and that's where we're going to get going. And you had laid out to me, what you had here in these items. Quarterback battle is where we're going to start, and it could be interesting this year.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. And that's one thing that Vanderbilt fans have been accustomed to over the years as a quarterback battle. This one looks different, though. And it looks different because of what they want to run, what they want to establish offensively. And I don't know if that's a terrible thing. I think it fits more of their identity. They want a guy who's going to be able to run. They want a guy who's going to be able to take care of the ball. And I think that's really been an emphasis point for them. So a lot of it's going to come down to that. Can they move the offense with their legs? Can they take care of the ball? And I think that's going to be some things to watch for. Obviously, a few big names here: Nate Johnson, a highly touted transfer from Utah; Diego Pavia, the New Mexico State quarterback, who I would probably handicap as the favorite to this point. He's got a lot of arm talent. Ran for dang near 1,000 yards last year, so a lot of ability with his legs too. And then a few guys coming back with Drew Dickey, who is kind of just the steady hand. Maybe doesn't do anything incredibly well, but probably does enough to keep his name in the mix. Blaise Berlowitz, a guy I really like as well, although he backed up Pavia at New Mexico State. I think the ceiling's really high there. Him and Tim Beck have had a long-standing relationship, so I wonder what the reps are going to be distributed out like, but I think it's going to be a really interesting decision to watch, and I want to get more of my piece in later, but Diego Pavia, probably the front runner right now, but Nate Johnson, I think, certainly has a case, and I thought he got better as the spring went on. I don't know how much you guys saw towards the end of the spring, but I thought he took care of the ball a lot better at the end of the spring. I thought he was able to showcase a little bit more of his throwing ability than early in the spring, and I think he's got to continue that momentum into the summer. It's certainly going to be difficult. I would say coming out of the spring, he's probably the one out of Dickey, Berlowitz, and himself that I thought was the best, but I think it's all up for interpretation now. And not to mention, you've got two freshman quarterbacks coming in who I think are pretty highly regarded. I don't know if they're going to be in the mix to start, but I think just looking into them and seeing if can they make the reads, what does the arm strength look like, how do they look against SEC bodies, I think all that's going to be really important for Vanderbilt this summer and is going to be what generates a lot of the headlines, Will.
Yeah, I think that you'd have to give Diego Pavia probably the leg up because Nate Johnson didn't run away with this, right? I mean, it looked like they spent all this money to bring him in, and he kind of honestly, like, I wouldn't say he had a terrible spring, but he didn't have the spring you would expect for the payment or the ticket they paid to get him. But Diego Pavia is a veteran. He obviously has been in Tim Beck's system for 2 years at New Mexico State. And he's got a connection with several of these coaches. He led New Mexico State to a 10-4 season. They beat Auburn. Actually, they blew the doors off Auburn, which we know Vanderbilt wouldn't do it this or wouldn't have done last year, right? Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to see how the battle, turns out. Now, I mean, Nate Johnson could still win this job. He's going to have the summer and early fall to well, I guess not technically early fall, but at least the summer to try to distance himself from Diego Pavia. But honestly, guys, like I said, if he didn't distance himself this spring when he had 5 months with no competition, no Diego Pavia on campus, and he couldn't, take the lead as the clear-cut quarterback, it's not looking good, honestly, for him.
Yeah, a couple things here, guys. Number one, a positive and a negative with the quarterback situation. The positive here is that you've got 2 guys that within this offense under Tim Beck, Jerry Kill, hopefully a revamped offensive line that can run the football, Mike Wright types, but honestly, I think we'd all agree better than Mike Wright, both throwing the football. So I think at the very least, you've got Johnson and Pavia that are serviceable quarterbacks at the Power 5 level. Now, is either one of them better than serviceable? I think potentially could turn into that, right? Johnson is still a younger guy that doesn't have a ton of experience. Pavia is the, kind of the gritty, grizzled veteran who's had a lot of experience under his belt, especially on the road in the SEC, beating Auburn, like you said, Will. So I think at the very least, you've got 2 guys that are tough, can run the football, and should be able to execute this offense the way Kill and Beck want. The other side of this, though, and something I'm potentially scared about, is another situation like last year and even the year before. And Joey and I have talked about this a lot, the quarterback messaging under Clark Lee, the way they have handled the quarterback situation and the position as a whole the last few years hasn't been great. And so, again, I'm not saying that's going to happen this year, but worries me a little bit, right? Say Nate Johnson starts the season, Diego Pavia then is inserted. You talked about financially, the money that was thrown out there to Nate Johnson. We're not sure what Diego Pavia is making. Obviously, everybody's making something nowadays, but that's in the equation. That's part of the equation, right? The quarterback position, even now more so than it ever has been, is going to be filled with drama maybe every week. And I feel like that needs to be eliminated. The quarterback drama has almost engulfed this team the last few years. So that's the one thing I'm scared about. But at the very least, guys, you've got a couple of serviceable guys that, more importantly, Joey, can run the football. And they didn't have any quarterbacks that could run the football last year.
Well, you have Walter Taylor, Big Walt, Billy.
That's true. That's true.
But I don't know that was enough. I don't think he had enough of a throwing skill set. And I think Johnson has a much better throwing skill set than Walter Taylor did. But I still have a lot of questions. And Diego Pavia is one that I still have questions with. I know Billy had more than I did when he originally committed, but I think a lot of the narrative around him is that the transition is going to be somewhat seamless to the SEC just because of what he did against Auburn. But when you look at his first year at New Mexico State and you look at what they did against Power 5 opponents, Pavia really struggled. They played Mizzou. He threw 17 balls for 76 yards and 6 completions. That's not going to cut it at Vanderbilt. They played against Wisconsin. He went 6 for 19 with 52 yards. I mean, that's not going to be good enough for Vanderbilt. And he was obviously pressured a lot in that game. He was sacked for negative 21 yards. Then Mizzou, he ran for 50 yards. So there's still some value there. And I think that's what I like about the quarterback room is that it's not going to be like last year where A.J. Swann's going to have to throw himself out of bad pockets and he's going to have to completely light it up. I think they can keep the chains moving just because of what their quarterbacks can do, but I don't think it's going to be necessarily seamless for either of them. I think Johnson has some room to go as a thrower. Pavia has to prove it to me at the Power 5 level a little bit more. I think the undersized thing concerns me a little bit, and I think the narrative around him is that he's been a little erratic, but only 9 interceptions last year, so I think maybe there's not as much to that as you would think, but still kind of pops up in your head. Is he a little too erratic? So I think Pavia is probably the guy I would bet on right now if I were to bet on somebody, but Johnson, I think, brings you a lot, and I think he has a lot of bailout ability with his legs, and I think Vanderbilt has really lacked that in the past. But like you said, they're going to have to commit to a quarterback, and we wrote about that after the bye week. I think I wrote a big, long column about how they need to commit to a quarterback. It was either after the Florida game or after the Auburn game. They got to pick a guy, and they still didn't, and that was really what hampered them. How are you going to control the locker room? How are you going to have guys get behind a quarterback if it's constantly like that? I think Pavia's got to prove it this summer, and I think Johnson's got to prove it as well. But I think Johnson's an asset, even if he's not the starting quarterback, that you got to find a way to get in the game at some point with his speed too. But yeah, those are the two guys I would probably pinpoint between. I'd say Pavia probably has the experience in the offense. He's got maybe a little bit better of an arm, at least better track record of throwing in games. Johnson, I think, was really simplified at Utah. But Johnson, I think, has the legs, and I almost think he has more upside just because of his size. And I think if he can develop as a thrower and develop making reads and leading guys into balls, I think he's got a chance to be a really good quarterback for them. So it's going to be interesting. Don't completely count out Drew Dickey either. I think he'll have an adequate number of reps to prove himself, but I just don't know that he brings the excitement of the other two. And Berlowitz is really toolsy as well, but I wonder if his reps will get cut a little bit in the summer as opposed to what they were in the spring.
Yeah, well, it's going to be really interesting if Pavia ends up taking control of this job, and I know we're looking way ahead here. It does get pretty interesting to see what could potentially happen because you've got Jerry Kill and Tim Beck back over in Nashville, right, who have followed Clark Lee and followed Pavia. You've got Berlowitz, who's also in that room. You've got Eli Stowers, who will be one of the tight ends from New Mexico State. You've got, a running back from New Mexico State.
Alan Young.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of Mexico State guys there. If it starts to feel like New Mexico State for Pavia, look out because he was really good last year, right? So now it's in the SEC, right? I don't want to get ahead of my skis. So you make a good point there, Joey. But that as we close out the quarterback battle here, it could be interesting.
Well, I will say this too. We talked a lot about it. We saw what happened last year. I think that Joey Lynch's offense was mediocre. The play calling wasn't very good. It really wasn't setting the quarterback up to succeed last year. And, Ken Seals was a good game manager, but he's limited, right? I mean, he's not going to throw the ball 50 or 60 yards. He's not going to be able to scramble and get you 10 yards consistently like Mike Wright was able to do when you need it. Kyle Shermer. AJ Swan was just too careless with the ball. He was trying to play hero ball too much. He was just taking way too many risks. I don't remember how many interceptions he ended up having last year, but it was a crazy amount. And I know last spring or last fall before the season started, everybody was just talking about how many turnovers he had in practice. And, Walter Taylor had no business playing last year. He wasn't ready one bit at all. It was a complete disaster, right? So I say all that to say this. Diego Pavia and Nate Johnson are Mike Wright, but a better passer, right? Mike Wright was able to lead this team to a 5-7 season. I believe if Pavia and Nate Johnson can at least just be average, they don't even have to be special, just average. Don't turn the ball over, be able to scramble. I'm looking at maybe like a 500 to 600 yard rushing season from either quarterback who plays, maybe 700 if things go well. It really depends on the offensive line, right? Which I think we'll get into that in a little bit. But I just think that Diego Pavia, I agree with Joey. Diego Pavia's size is concerned. He plays erratic. I don't know if he's going to be able to take the toll on getting beat down every week by an SEC opponent. But you have Nate Johnson, who is a better backup than Vanderbilt's had in years. So I think this is the best room they've had since Kyle Shermer. So they at least got that going for him. It's really going to be decided on how the playmakers step up this year. Honestly, who's going to help these guys out?
And that's what we're getting to next. The playmakers, specifically the receivers. And Joey brought this up to me as a question: who emerges in the receiver room? It's a very good question because you look at the receiver room from last year. We talked about that receiver room as being pretty solid. I mean, Will Shepard, London Humphreys going into the season, right? At least, obviously, it didn't pan out. Top 3 receivers are gone in Shepard, Humphreys, and McGowan. This year, you come in with Junior Sherrill, Quincy Skinner, and whoever else steps up, right? I mean, that for me, it's kind of Skinner and Sherrill, and all right, who's going to step up, right? You got Micah Bell coming in from Notre Dame, who I'm hearing could be the fastest player in the team. And obviously, you've got a few other guys back there that have done a few things, maybe like a Richie Hoskins, who, had a touchdown last year. And I like Hoskins, right? I think Hoskins is a guy that, with development and some strength, can be a decent player this year. Now, is Richie Hoskins ideally your third guy? Probably not, but that's kind of where they're at this year, Joey, receiver-wise. I think Quincy Skinner has to be the dude, right? I mean, he has to be the guy. Sherrill probably has to be that second guy, statistically at least. I just don't know that the transfers are guys that are immediate impact guys. Texas Tech receiver Loic Fungi, I think, is a guy that has some potential, and they really need something out of him. But I mean, other than that, guys, I don't know who emerges, but somebody other than Skinner or Sherrill is going to have to emerge. And I don't hate saying that could be Micah Bell. He's a Clarkley guy from Notre Dame. You saw what they did last year with McGowan. Can Bell be that guy? Who knows? But that could be my pick. But I'm interested to see where you guys go.
Yeah, I think Quincy Skinner's got to take a step forward, and I think we all know that. Quincy Skinner knows that, and he told us that in the spring that he thinks he's in line for a big leap, and I don't think that's completely unrealistic. He's obviously going to have really good corners on him, and that's going to be something to worry about because I think that hampered Will Shepard a good bit is that they weren't really able to take some pressure off of him on the other side. Skinner's got to stay on the field, and if he can, I have some decently high hopes for him. Junior Sherrill, I don't know that Junior Sherrill's going to be a guy who's a complete superstar, but I think he's got to maybe take a little bit of a step forward, maybe be more than just a deep threat, which I think he maybe was a little bit more towards the end of the year. And then, like you said, there's a lot of transfers that have a lot of things to prove. I'm not feeling comfortable if I'm Vanderbilt if I have Richie Hoskins as my third guy, and I like Richie Hoskins too. I think he's a practice superstar. He's like a Bears camp guy from when
he dominated spring. He dominated in the spring.
I don't know if you were there the last spring scrimmage. He had an unbelievable touchdown where he broke a tackle, and I'm comfortable saying that because they actually put out the film of it. So
yeah,
I'm not breaking anything, but I do really like Wiley from Nevada, Darian Wiley.
Yeah,
he caught 24 balls for 400 yards in 2023. I just think he is a guy out of the transfers, probably the one I have the most confidence in. I think he has a decently well-rounded skill set. Fungi, I think, could maybe be something. Micah Bell's speed is certainly an asset. He's got to learn the position a little bit more, though. He hasn't played at this level, obviously making the transition from a DB. Jeremiah Dillon didn't really impress me in the spring. I think he's got some good things going for him, but he's a little smaller than I maybe thought. Some of the X factors, too, are the freshmen. Joseph McVay, especially, guy who I think has been pretty highly regarded on the recruiting front as of late. Tristan Brown, Marquise Barrett. I think one of those guys got to step up and be a playmaker for you. Billy, we talked a lot about last year, AJ Swann's arm strength and all this. If your guys can't get open and you can't block for him, though, and I think Swann was one of the more highly regarded guys this time of year that they had in recent memory, but they just didn't do enough for him. And obviously, he dug his own grave with the turnovers and the erratic decision-making, and the injury didn't help him. But it doesn't matter what the quarterbacks do. If their guys can't get open and they can't block for them, I think they're going to have a really hard time. I don't know where you pinpoint that third receiver contribution coming from. Can one of those transfers be a 2 for them? I don't know, but I'm a little concerned about the receiver room. I think it's going to be a really interesting battle to watch, see who makes plays in the summer.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely need somebody to emerge. You mentioned about Quincy Skinner waiting for that next step, right, Joey, to see him, become what we think he can become. I know this is going to be a crazy hot take, but I actually thought Quincy Skinner had a higher ceiling than Will Shepherd. Not to say that he's a better player right now, because he's not, right? But Will Shepherd's kind of like a one-trick pony. He's an aerial threat a lot of times. How many times was AJ Swan throwing the ball down the field to him? Quincy Skinner's more fluid. He's better after the catch. He's able to he's a home run threat, right? I don't think anyone would say Will Shepherd was a home run threat. There was a couple times he was able to break free and score a touchdown. But when Quincy Skinner gets the ball, he's a playmaker, right? He's shifty. You don't know what he's going to be able to do. If he's able to put it together and stay healthy, he could be a very good receiver in the SEC. And, you said Fungi, right?
Yeah.
He was okay at Texas Tech. He had a better 2022 season than he did 2023 season. I'm not looking for Jeremiah Dillon to really do anything. He never did anything at Ole Miss, and he didn't do anything in the spring from what most people had said. He was kind of unnoticeable. I honestly think, Joey, that the freshman is going to be the player who's really going to step up. I don't know which one, but a freshman's going to step up. And how many times? Last year they had two freshmen step up and contribute, right, in a pretty good receivers room, in Sherrill and Humphreys. I think that people are kind of sleeping on Sherrill too. I could see Sherrill taking a huge step in year 2. I'm talking like a Kalijah Lipscomb level step in his second year. Kalijah wasn't, he kind of had a similar freshman year to junior Sherrill at his time at Vanderbilt. But in that second season, when he was able to really develop his chemistry with Kyle Shermer, he was one of the best receivers we've ever had. I mean, he was really fun to watch. We kind of wasted him, honestly, in my opinion. But there's talent on this room. You don't have to have Ohio State or LSU level receivers. You just have to have some people who can get open and catch the ball consistently. But you don't need a bunch of home run playmakers. I mean, we're not going to the college football playoffs this year, breaking news. We just need to be able to be competitive enough to try to, make a bowl game this year. And you just need, at the bare minimum, average players to do that.
Good point about the freshmen, because that is one thing Vanderbilt under Clark Lee, Barton Simmons have done a pretty solid job of bringing in some receiver talent. Getting London Humphreys to campus, and Junior Sherrill, of course, who I think is poised for a big year, is bound to be another guy this year break out. Is it Joseph McVay? Is it Tristan Brown? Is it Marquise Barrett? My gut, like Tristan Brown is a guy that reminds me of Jaden McGowan. I've gotten some comparisons from people within the program to Jaden McGowan, and I think Tristan Brown is a guy that is ready. He doesn't need a year or two of development. Like, he's kind of like Jaden McGowan in that way, that he's physically ready. He's not huge, but I think
he's bigger
Tristan
than McGowan, though. I think he's about 2 or 3 inches taller than McGowan, though.
Yeah, he's listed at 5'9", 170. But then you also look at Joseph McVay, who's a little bit bigger at about 6'1", 190, who is another athletic freak. So guys, that credit to them, they've been able to get some of those athletic receivers in, and there's going to be some, maybe not even pressure. I'm sure the staff is saying, guys, we're going to need you this year, right? I mean, you're going to have to perform, because I don't know about those portal guys. I just don't know yet. I like Darian Wiley. That was a good point there, Joey. But at the end of the day, Skinner and Sherrill have to be the top 2 guys in my mind. And if anybody else steps up, that's a luxury. But Skinner has to stay healthy. That's the key. And same with Sherrill, because those are the guys that are going to have to perform for you. So Good job, guys, on the playmakers there. And I think we'll talk more about tight ends, but that receiver room specifically, so many options, right? Now, they might not all be tremendous, right? Perfect options that you'd like, but you got a lot of potential, breakout guys there. So I'm sure we'll look more into the tight end room, because that's another position that could be a playmaker spot for Vanderbilt this year.
And they want to use more too.
What was that?
Tim Beck has really put an emphasis on tight end. He wants to use tight ends a lot more than I think Joey Lynch did. And I think they have playmakers there with Spence. Fortenberry's a great athlete. I don't know how much he's going to contribute. Stowers, I think, is going to be a real contributor. And I've always been a Cam Johnson guy. So I think I like where they're at there. But, yeah, receiver, like you said, concern.
Honestly, guys, I really believe that this offense is going to be run heavy. I would say that the Joey Lynch era was probably about 55 to 60% pass, probably 45% run. I think it's going to be the opposite with this offense. I think it's going to probably be about 55 to 60% run heavy with about 40% in pass. Which that's not a bad thing though. Normally, that's honestly been a successful formula for Vanderbilt, even back to the James Franklin days. They were more run heavy back then as well, and it worked out pretty well for them.
You know why? Because they had some offensive line pieces that were pretty solid in a Wesley Johnson and just a reliable offensive line. And that's where we'll go lastly for our third thing to watch, the trenches, right? So not just the offensive line, but that's where we'll start, right? Because the offensive line is probably the most important thing this year, just because of how bad it was last year. I mean, there's no sugarcoating it. That was just visually one of the worst offensive lines I think I've ever seen. I mean, there were times when Vanderbilt's linemen just didn't even move. I mean, there was I forget who it was, but guys, I mean, that was awful. So that has to be better. It's not going to be hard to be better than last year. You've got a new coach in Chris Klanakis who, with that run scheme, like you said, Will, has a lot of experience with running quarterbacks like Colin Kaepernick, Lamar Jackson. I think you have to look at that, but they've brought in some pieces. Chase Mitchell from Liberty, who was with Coach Klanakis last year, is a guy to watch. Now, I'm not saying none of these guys they brought in are road graders necessarily, right? They're not maulers, right? Maybe they couldn't even play at other SEC schools, but it's always been hard to get great offensive linemen and sometimes even good offensive linemen at Vanderbilt. So I think Chase Mitchell is obviously a guy to watch. Hubbard from UTSA is a bigger guy they brought in, who is a guy to watch. I mean, those two guys will likely start. You know, you've got Grayson Morgan back. Stephen Lasoya is a veteran from Mississippi State. You've got some options there. Gage Pitchford is a guy that got some run last year and will probably play a little bit. Obviously, Gunnar Hansen. And so you got some options there, guys. But judging off last year, Joey, it has to be better. And how much better this offensive line is gonna determine a lot about not only this offense, but this team as a whole and how many games they can potentially win.
Yeah, it's not only that it was bad last year, it's bad in the spring too. And they've added a lot of guys since, and they needed to, but they were really shorthanded in the spring, and it showed. The defensive line just completely dominated a few practices we were at. And I think that's what led to a lot of the offensive struggles is that guys were in the backfield so quickly. And I think they've certainly made some changes. You look at who they had going into the spring, it's a lot different group than what they have now. Cade McConnell from Minnesota with the program now. Stephen Hubbard, a former JUCO All-American, is with the program now. And then Chase Mitchell, obviously, you mentioned a guy who's going to really help them. Sean Williams, our recruiting guy, graded that as an A-plus transfer. So I think they've got some potential. They've got some guys with ability there. But I think it's just got to be a lot more competitive this summer. I think the defensive line probably a little bit better than it was last year. Corday Snyder is going to be a guy who's going to help them. And they've got some younger guys who've probably grown up a little bit. But, man, they can't dominate practices like they did in the spring if this is going to be a good team. Like, they're going to have to – I mean, so you have concerns with the receivers and their playmaking ability. The quarterbacks, which obviously a bit of concern with as well. I think it's a good room, but I think there's still some concern there. And then the running backs, I think just kind of are what the running backs are. The offensive line is really going to make this whole thing go. And it almost reminds me of like A.J. Hoggard with the basketball team. They're only going to be as good as what A.J. Hoggard can unlock with the other guys. And that's kind of how I feel about the offensive line. The running backs are going to be as good as the offensive line allows them to be. The receivers and the quarterbacks are going to have more time to connect and are going to be as good as the offensive line is going to allow them to be. And a lot of the time last year, quarterbacks didn't have a chance because the offensive line just couldn't get it done. And we talked to Bradley Ashmore after a lot of games, and he did not mince words. They were not good enough in a lot of those games, and that can't be a consistent theme this year, Will.
Yeah, man, there's a lot to unpack here. I think one of the biggest disappointing things of the Clark Lee era is that this is year 4, guys, and this is year 3 for his first recruiting class, and we haven't seen a single offensive lineman significantly emerge as a clear-cut starter. Right, this whole offensive line's it's kind of like a work in progress right now. I do feel good about Grayson Morgan. Originally, he was going to play center. They kicked Steven Lasoya out to center from guard, which I like that. I think that's probably good to have a veteran at center because they're the one that's kind of like directing everything and kind of calling the shots on the line. It's interesting to see where Grayson Morgan's going to play, right? I mean, he can play tackle, he can play guard, he can honestly play all 5 positions if he needs to, right? I think his best position is honestly probably guard because of his size and how athletic he is. But he might have to play tackle just because of need, right? I mean, it's not really determined where he's going to be. And then Miles Sandoval apparently was another player who kind of emerged throughout camp at guard, and he can play tackle as well. They obviously brought in a couple transfers. You would like to think that they can't get worse than they were last year. 2022 was kind of like fool's gold, right? I mean, that, I get maybe it was Mike Wright bailing these guys out for how bad they actually were. But when you have a mobile quarterback, it does alleviate some of the deficiencies because, you don't have a statue back there like Joe Milton, who's just getting beat up and under pressure and under duress all game long. But I mean, they have talent. They just have to step up. There are no excuses at this point. This is year 3 for Clark Lea's first recruiting class, and they were offensive line heavy. Now, a couple guys have left from that 2022 class, but these guys have got to step up. Grayson Morgan, he doesn't have to be a superstar, right? But he's got to at least be an average starter on the offensive line in the SEC, average SEC starting caliber offensive line. And that's the thing. You don't have to have elite production on the offensive line. You just need average. That means that you're doing good sometimes, you're doing bad sometimes, but you're not just getting your quarterback absolutely killed. How many concussions did AJ Swan have in 2022, or was it 2023? I don't even remember. Maybe I've had a concussion. I don't know. But it was one of the years, he had like 2 or 3 concussions in one season because he just kept getting beat up.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be better. That's really the bottom line. Cade McConnell and Anthony Miles are a couple other younger guys to watch. Who knows how much they play. McConnell is a pretty talented kid from Minnesota who they actually originally recruited. He's got some ties with his dad. Actually played for the Titans for a little bit. But either way, guys, it's got to be better. So, and there's really not a whole lot, I think, to sort out. Like, I think the 5 right now would be Grayson Morgan, Steven Lasoya, Gunnar Hansen, Hubbard, and Mitchell. I mean, like, that's what I would have right now. Now, position-wise, not sure what fluctuation goes on. There'll probably be some switches, but that's what I would have right now, those 5 guys. But you've also got Pitchford in there. Either way, it's got to improve. It's got to be better than what they put out there last year. And, another reason for concern for the offensive line is the fact that they struggled this past spring. We both saw that, Joey, going to practices and scrimmages. But the other side of that, credit to the defensive line. Clark Lea has that unit going strong. Larry Black and Coach Hay have done a really good job, I think, all throughout the Clark Lea tenure. Now, it really hasn't come to fruition. Like last year, we weren't talking about the defensive line being a very strong unit. I think the year before, right, year 2 of Clark Lea, it was a little bit better. Last year, you couldn't really talk positively about any unit. But I do think this defensive line group has potential this year, whether it's Darren Agu, transfer Zaylen Wood from MTSU, right? I mean, they brought in some guys that I think could make an impact. Corday Sidner from Purdue actually really impressed me over the spring. I think you would agree as well, Joey. This group has to be better. Well, we've talked about this over the phone a lot. Like, Darren Agu hasn't really reached his ceiling and his potential yet. If he does this year, that could unlock another level for this defense and really help some of those guys in the back end. But that's another thing, guys. The back end guys are sitting back there saying, hey, we need to get some pressure on the quarterback. And Vanderbilt's going to have to do that, Will, this year if this defense wants to be where they ultimately want to be this year.
Yeah, well, another thing that's going to help is the corners aren't going to be playing 10 yards off the receivers, right? Like they were last year or the last 2 years. I think Clark Lea is just a more organized coach, right? He just feels like he's got a tighter grasp on like what's going on with his defense than what Nick Howell had the last 2 seasons. And I expect the defense to take a significant jump in 2024, right? You remember in 20, I think it was 2015, Billy, when Derrick Mason took over the defense, when they fired David Katulski, I think was his name.
Yeah.
And how much better that was. So it's funny. I guess Vanderbilt's got this trend of their head coaches calling the defensive plays or being the defensive coordinators now, defensive coordinator now. But I think the defense is going to be a lot better. They've got more secondary cover or talent. Dante Carter is going to be, I'm interested to see what he does at safety. They've got the kid from Eastern Washington who's coming in. His name is slipped my mind right now.
Marlon Jones.
Marlon Jones. You hope Martell Height can take a step in year 2. Your defense doesn't have a chance if you have bad secondary and you can't get pass rush, right? You're just giving the quarterback all day to pick you apart. And if the secondary is even average, that's the word of the year, guys. Average for Vanderbilt. Average, right? 6 and 6 average. If they can at least be average, that will help the pass rush out to give them a little more time to get to the quarterback instead of just being wide open immediately, right? You want to see Devin Lee take a step. You want to see Darren Agu take a step. Corday Sindner from Purdue, Joey mentioned him. He's a big body. Hopefully he takes a step and he's able to do something. Wutaha, he's got to take a step. I mean, there's all these guys that just have to take a big step. But the talent is there. They're big. They're SEC level size players. Man, Darren, I mentioned on the offensive line, Darren Agu is one of those that first recruits in Clark Lee's recruiting class that's got to take a step. That recruiting class has significantly underwhelmed. This is year 3 is the year we got to see something.
Yeah, I think something worth noting, I'm glad you guys brought this up with the defense. I think it's going to look a lot different in terms of how they're scheming things. And I don't know that I can blueprint how exactly it's going to look different, but it seems like it's a little more professionally oriented, like a little more NFL type stuff based on what Langston Patterson was talking about. I think they're probably going to try to use their length and athleticism on the back end a little bit more. I think they're probably going to be a little more versatile there, but I think that's really going to help. And I think maybe that could lead to more production on the defense. Is Clark Lee leading them? I think they have some playmakers there, but guys, the defense is going to be better than the offense in the summer, but the offense has to be more competitive than it was in the spring. I think they only won one of the 3 scrimmages by their metric, which I think is probably pretty offense favorable, I guess. So it's got to be better. They got to be more competitive there, Billy. And I think to have a chance this year, their offensive line's got to really improve. And their defensive line does too, but their defensive line cannot dominate practice every day. The offensive line has to take some pride in it. And as Tim Corbin said, they have to feel good about themselves coming out of the summer. And I think they have lacked that for a lot of the spring and a lot of past seasons.
On the edge, there's a lot of guys I think Vanderbilt fans could be excited about. Aeneas DeCosmo isn't a guy that really flashes, but I think he's a solid veteran to have in that room. Darren Agu, freak talent, right? Miles Capers, who is kind of, getting back from that injury. Mason Carter, a young freshman who I think they're really excited about. You got some other younger guys, Linus Zunk, who we haven't seen a ton of, but he's similar in size to Darren Agu. I mean, they kind of came in here together internationally. Zunk 6'6", 260. So, again, look out for him. Corday Sindner, like you mentioned, Will. But I look at a guy like Issa Wataha, Christian James, Zaylen Wood, Demarion Thomas, Devin Lee. They've got to get push inside. I mean, that's something, again, under Clark Lee, they have not really been able to do. You got to get a little bit of that. And I think you need to see more of that. But also on the edge, look for Darren Agu to really have a breakout season, because he had, like last year wasn't really a breakout year. I think Agu has to get to the quarterback for this defense to be at their best. And I'm with you overall defensively, Will and Joey. Like it's going to be a lot different. They could downplay scheme wise. No, it's still still same principles. No, I think this is going to be fairly different. And anytime we've gotten into schemes, they've gotten very secretive and tight-lipped. So they never want to answer any defensive scheme questions. And that's probably a good thing for Vanderbilt fans. Like it probably means it's going to be a lot different than what Nick Howell was trying to run. So good point overall defensively there, Will. Like under Clark Lee, it's going to be a lot different. And I think that's a good thing for Vanderbilt fans. So that's what we got. 3 things to watch. The quarterback battle, number 1, offensively, Diego Pavia or Nate Johnson, right? Does someone else emerge? I mean, obviously, those are the 2 guys that you would look at to play this year, but what happens there? Who emerges in the receiver room? Skinner, Sherrill, we know what you got in those 2 guys. Who else emerges as a 3rd and 4th guy? And then how competitive are they in the trenches? Hopefully we did a good job of answering those, but we'll continue to discuss those topics throughout the summer. We'll go deeper into defense next episode, likely next week. And we will be going every Wednesday, by the way. So at least what we're shooting for. We might have some different days and times and weeks go on here in the summer especially. But, guys, we got one more thing to touch on. Carson Lawrence, Macaulay, the Macaulay School in Chattanooga. Some good news for Vanderbilt fans. Michigan came calling, Virginia Tech, I think it was, West Virginia, like big-time programs have come calling for him, and he said he's locked in. All right, there was a great piece on the Rivals about that, and basically saying, hey, after his visit, he's very, very much so locked in. I think that's huge, guys, and I think that's another indicator of Clark Lee taking a hold defensively, especially in the secondary in terms of recruiting. I think Jamal Richardson is a guy on the rise in this business. I think I've been really impressed with him recruiting-wise, locking in Dante Carter, even Randon Fontenette. Saw a video of them on his visit with him. I think having 2 really talented guys like that helps on the recruiting trail, right? You want to play with talented players, and I think they've been a huge part of that recruitment. But, Joey, I know you had some quotes here from that Rivals piece, but that's big news for Vanderbilt fans.
Yeah, I think it's still going to be a battle to the finish for Carson Lawrence. I mean, signing day is a ways away, but I think Vanderbilt's got to feel pretty good about where they're at after the official visit. Lawrence said, it felt like home and the culture is changing with all the new guys coming into the program. It felt like I fit right in. I think Vanderbilt will be hard to beat just because of the position I'd be in when I get there and the relationship I have with the guys over there. I think Melvin Rice has been a big factor in that recruitment as well, and newer guys. Yeah. So I think they've got a real chance to keep Lawrence, and I think that would tell you a lot about their new guys, position coaches at those positions. And I think he's the type of player that they need to get in. He's only a 3-star for Rivals, if I remember correctly, but I think he's long, he's athletic, he's fast. I think they need that. And they've had that a little bit at the back end, but I think the more playmakers you can get there, the more guys who can be difference makers and get their hands on the ball, be around the ball, I think is going to be huge. And I think Carson Lawrence is one of those guys. It's just that they've got to get to the finish line here. Ole Miss is a factor. West Virginia is a factor. I think Michigan is as well. You got to keep the in-state guys, especially from a school like that where you recruited his teammates throughout a lot of the year. He's going to be on campus this year, Jeremy St. Hilaire. So this is one that they should win, but it's going to be tough to get to the finish line. I think with what Carson Lawrence has said and what I think he's thinking right now, though, I think you pretty much believe that they're in a good spot here, Will.
Yeah, I mean, I think Vanderbilt's turning into safety U, right? This is kind of like Dante Carter all over again, right? It kind of like a hidden gem, and it's kind of his recruitment is starting to explode. I think Vanderbilt has a good chance of keeping him. I mean, it seems like he's bought into what they're selling, right? Clark Lee and the message is really resonating with him, and he seems like he's all in. Obviously, there's a long time between now and December for early signing day, but if the big teams are already trying to get him and he's like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks, that's a good indicator for him staying committed through the process. Now, if Vanderbilt starts losing a lot this season and kind of on shaky ground, maybe then he decommits. But I think if we have the season that we all think we'll have, like at least improved, like between that 4 to 6 win range, I would say that most of these commits are probably going to stay firm on their commitment. And it's a good sign, right? That's a good sign to see that we're able to keep some guys, and you got to have talent to win, right? So you got to be able to win these guys. You got to be able to get them on campus eventually. And if you don't, then you're in trouble.
I know the coaches did a really good job in recruiting Carson Lawrence and getting him to commit, but something tells me Dante Carter had a pretty big role in this. And guys, I think Carter, we'll talk more about him, but he could be the beginning of something pretty special, at least recruiting wise, especially timing wise with the stadium when it's built. Like Dante Carter, it's kind of the snowball effect for Vanderbilt football. I think Clark is kind of using that, and even using some other guys like a Randon Fontenette, right, to recruit other players at that position. So I know we'll continue to talk about that, but at the end of the day, guys, the theme in recruiting has been defensively, right? Dante Carter, you got Fontenette over from TCU, now Carson Lawrence. I think they need some of that offensively now, right? Can Jerry Kill work some magic? Tim Beck, all the other offensive coaches, like, you need to start to see some of that offensively on the other side, because in today's era, just like baseball with home runs and power, you got to score some points, right? You got to put the ball in the end zone if you're Vanderbilt. And we'll continue to talk more football, of course, throughout the summer. But guys, that was pretty good little first episode. Especially for Will, longtime Vanderbilt fan, even living in East Tennessee in enemy territory. I'm already thinking about Tennessee week, how fun that'll be for Will, reporting live from East Tennessee. But anyway, appreciate it, guys. Again, we will come back with another episode next week. But every week, up until fall camp, we'll have reports, of course, on fall camp. Joey and I being able to go, and Chris, of course, somewhat. But, Will, thanks for checking in, man. Joey, of course, thanks for checking in. This could change every week, but first one, it's pretty good. We'll be back with you next week. But that's Joey Dwyer alongside Will as well. I'm Billy Derrick. Thanks for checking out another episode of the Vandy Sports Podcast.